Hey guys, this is Mitch with Fine.CGI, and today we're going to continue our multiplayer tutorial series-esque thing where we go through and build a small multiplayer system, if that makes sense. And today we're going to be running through how to create a login system within our project. So we're going to go through how to create the panel. We're going to talk about how to actually properly secure your password by salting and hashing it. We're going to talk about how to return data from the server so you can pull data from the database and actually, display it on the screen so you actually can get a good primer on that. And we're going to talk about how to get SQLite support in our project for our server. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to build out our login screen. So to do that, all we really need to do is just right click our control node, add in a child node, and let's add in a panel. And in this panel, we're going to make it about this big, give or take. We'll put it right about here. We'll right click our panel, add in a child node, and we're going to add in a rich text label. Now, this rich text label is going to have username, and that's where the person's going to put their username. Now, you probably don't need to capitalize the N, so I'll go ahead and make that a lowercase n. Now we're going to take this guy, we're going to duplicate it like so, and we'll put in password. And then we need to put in a input box. So we need to put in a text edit box. We'll make it about this big, give or take. And if you want to use a line edit, you're welcome to. It just kind of depends on what you prefer. So you can see if I type line edit, that is a line edit. And I think I might actually just stick with that, make it consistent. So we'll have both of them be line edits. Now, one of the nice things about line edits, if we come in here and put password text and then username text, if we come into our password text and we type something like hello, if we come down here, you'll see that there is what's called a secret. You can click on that and that will make it be a hidden text. So that way you don't know what I'm typing. So that's one of the big advantages to having a line edit. Now I'm going to get rid of that text real quick, and the placeholder text will be password. And then for the username, the placeholder text will be username. Like that. And then we'll need to have the ability to create our users, right? So we'll just come in here, we'll select these guys, we'll drag it down slightly. We're going to right click our panel, add in a button, and we're going to actually add in 3 buttons total, I think. So the first button will be create user. I'll put it up here in the upper right hand corner like that. And then I'm going to call this create user like that. I'm going to duplicate this twice. I'll drag one down here and I'll drag this guy down here. Now, technically, we don't need this one over here on the left if you're going to force your users to log in. But in my case, I'm going to make it a cancel button. That way, you guys can use this as a reusable component for your game. So we'll say cancel, and then we'll hit log in as well. Now, with cancel, we'll change the title to cancel like that. And for login, we'll change it to login like that. And now we have our basic panel pretty much done. Let's do our little create user panel. So we'll add in a child node. We'll add in a panel like that. We'll drag this guy over here just for ease of use. If you guys want to make it pop up in a different spot, you're more than welcome to do that. But in my case, I'm just going to make it pop up like this, and we can go from there. So what I will do is I will right click my panel, add in a child node. I'm going to add in a VBox container. I'm going to make that be a full rec, and we'll drag this guy down like this. And then we'll also drag this guy, and we'll right click our panel, add in a child node. We're going to add in a rich text label like that. We'll click right here and make it expand all the way across the top. We'll pull this guy down, and we're going to type create user. Now I want this to be center aligned, so I'm going to do BB code enabled, and I'm going to go bracket bracket center, and then I want it to be bold, so I'm going to go bracket bracket B to bold it. And you'll see that we have a nice good bold title here. You could also do that here if you want to. You could actually come in here and grab a rich text label. So if we duplicate that, drag it up, we could do something like this and maybe center align this guy. So bracket, bracket, center, bracket, bold, and then do login and BB code enable that guy. And actually should be B, not bold. And then we could probably pull this guy over here, but you can see that it's getting a little bit crowded. So I'll just pull this over here. It doesn't look super great, but really creating a user, we could put it somewhere else, but I think for right now, we'll just leave it like this. Now, if we go to our create user panel, we have a VBox container here. So that means that we should grab an HBox container. So that way we can better organize our stuff. So we'll grab an HBox container, go like that. We're going to right click it and add in a child node. And we'll go ahead and add in a line edit. And we'll add in a rich text label like so. And then we'll do username and we'll do username text like that. And then I'm going to drag this up. So it's actually, I think I'll keep it like that. And then for the text, we'll say username. And actually, that's not the correct thing. We'll grab our text and type username for our text. There we go. Username. And for this, we'll get rid of that placeholder text. And we will go ahead and tell this underneath our layout, we'll go ahead and do container sizing, and we will go fill, make sure that that's fill. We'll go to both of these lower objects here and go in here and go to layout, and we'll go container sizing, fill, and make sure we check expand, and that will expand this out. And now we can take this and duplicate it. And then we can do the same thing, but for password. We can come in here and go password. And then for the text, we can change this to password like that. And now we're going to need to add in a button so that way we can actually submit that information. So we'll right click on our VBox container, add in a button like that. And we'll call this submit. And then for the button, we'll type submit like that. Awesome. So now I think it would be good to allow the user to back out of this. What if they don't want to log in? So if we drag this guy up so that way it kind of tightens up our panel a little bit. If we right click on our panel, add in a child node, add in a button, and then we'll throw it to our upper right hand corner. We'll drag this guy out like this and make it a giant X. Just like that. Make it maybe a tiny bit smaller. And then we'll come down here. We'll go to theme, override. We'll go to styles. Under normal, we'll click right here and click style box empty. And that's going to make that invisible. So that way we just have it there without people actually seeing it. And that's just going to make it look a little bit nicer. Also going to grab this VBox container and pull it across like that. That way it just has a little bit of buffer on the left and right. And now you'll see that we basically have this pretty well set up. For this, I'm going to name it close. For submit, we have submit. This is just a rich text label. That's fine. For the panel, let's name it create user. Panel like that. And I think actually panel has one N, not two. So we'll do that. And basically from here, we have our basic scenes set up. Now all we have to do is basically just create them as reusable components. Now, the nice thing about this is one of the big things that's important about Godot is making things reusable. So in order to make this reusable, what we need to do is we need to make them as their own scene. So we'll right click and we'll go in here and save branch as scene. And we will go ahead and call this create user panel. That's fine. If we double click on create user panel, you can see that it just exists out here, right? And if we right click on it, attach a script, and we can come in here and do C# create user panel. I like that, but I don't like how it's not capitalized. So create user panel.cs, and you will see that's going to boot up our C# project here. Now, one of the biggest changes that I've made in my Godot journey is trying to make my stuff a little bit more reusable as I work. And one of the big important things to do that is creating what's called signals. And signals are basically ways for you to be able to send data from a child component up to parent components. And it allows you to basically send data from one place to another in a reusable way. So if you do bracket signal, and you do public delegate void, and then you name your signal. So create user event handler, like that. And then if you want to pass in arguments, you can. So in our case, we're going to do string user, comma, string password, like that. And that's it. And then we can come in here, get rid of all of this because we don't need stuff to run over time or anything like that, right? Now we just need to hook up our buttons, right? We have two basic buttons that we're going to be using, right? So we have the submit and the remove. So if we come to close and we do base button down, we control A, copy it, go into our create user panel, and we say public void on close button down, then we can just queue free like that. And then we can do the same thing with our submit. So we can come in here, button down, copy it, connect, enter, public void on submit button down. And then we can basically submit our password and username, right? But we don't want to just go and call the client code to do that. We want to basically fire off an event to tell our parent that we are trying to log in. So what we can do is we can go emit signal, create user dot signal name dot create user, comma, and then whatever arguments we want to pass in. So in our case, we want to go and get our username and our password and send that back, right? So all we have to do is just say get node, bracket, rich text label, and then we have to path to that location. So you can see that we have this right here. We have VBox container, then HBox container, and then username text. So we can copy our VBox container slash our HBox container. So if we do this, HBox container slash username text dot text, like that. And then we can pass in another argument. So we can go comma, and then basically grab this exact text here, paste it, but then change it from HBox container to HBox container 2, and then change it from username text. Actually, it looks like it still is username text instead of password text. So we'll say password and then password text. That way it just makes more sense. So we'll copy that in, and then we'll come back to our VS Code here and paste that in, and then put a semicolon at the end. Now, if we want to format this a little bit better, so if I reflow this to kind of fit a little bit better, we can come in here and just hit enter and then hit enter, and that will reflow it a little bit better, just to be organized, a little bit better and easier for us to understand. So then we'll hit Control S, and there we go. That should hopefully work. We'll have to test that to verify, but it should work, at least in theory. So now we can go back to Godot here, and then we can come into our test scene, Control S, and then let's just come down to our panel here and type login panel, like that. Then we can right click, attach a script, and call it loginpanel.cs. We'll go ahead and create that. And now I'm just going to right click this guy. I'm going to save branch as scene, login panel.tscn, and that's going to make our login panel just exist out by itself, if that makes sense. And now we can hit Control S on our test scene, go into our login panel, which is right here, grab our create user panel. Let's drag this guy over so that way it's just off in its own section here. We'll Control S that. And then we can come into our login panel script and hit the little script button like that. And first, we'll need to create two signals. We'll get rid of these guys because we don't need to do anything on ready or on process, at least not yet. So, we'll get rid of them for right now. And then we can come in here and just create two signals. So first things first, we'll go bracket signal. And we'll say public delegate this, because there's no point in going more difficult than just copying and pasting. So we'll say create user event handler and login user event handler. Now we can basically just hook up our buttons. So let's hit Control S. Let's go back to Godot here, and let's hook up all of our buttons. So we'll come in here under Create User. We'll double click that on Create User button down. Public void paste bracket like that. We'll grab login, do the same thing, copy it, connect, come down here, public void paste bracket like that, and then cancel. Same thing on button down, copy that, connect, and go public void on cancel button down. Now, when you do a cancel, you're going to queue free. So queue free because that means the person doesn't want to log in. So you could basically just delete the panel, right? And just get rid of it. If you're not getting rid of your panel, you could hide it or something like that. But in my case, I'm just going to delete it. When we log in, all we're going to do is emit our signal, just like we did with our create user panel. When it says emit signal like this, we're just basically going to copy this bad boy. We're going to bring it in here and we're just going to paste like that. And then we'll just come in here and reroute these guys. So you can see that we have the password text. So we'll just grab user. It looks like I have a capital N this time, text, and password text like that. And it's literally the same exact thing. We're just going to emit that signal and there we go. That's it. On create user, what we need to do is we need to instantiate the create user panel. So that means that we have to have access to that panel. So let's make a pack scene specifically for that. So bracket export public pack scene create user window like that. And then when we do our create user, all we have to do is say var create user window is equal to create user window dot instantiate as type create user panel, which I probably should change that to create user panel, but that's okay. We'll do that. And then that will instantiate our panel here. So I should probably do create user panel, and then create user panel with a lowercase c. That way it just all kind of meshes well. And then we can come in here and basically add child the create user panel like that. And then we can go ahead and say create user panel dot create user plus equals create user like that. Now you'll notice that this has a underline like this, and it says, hey, it doesn't exist in this current context. So if we click quick fix, we could just generate that method and it'll automatically have everything built out for us. We don't have to do anything. So now all we have to do is basically just do exactly what this is doing. See how it's emitting that signal? Same exact thing. We're just going to come in here, emit that signal. And instead of just doing these two guys, we're just going to do user, comma, password like that. And then we can basically just snap this guy up here and snap this guy up here. That way it just has like a nice, it's just nice and consistent here. And that will basically allow us to create a user, if that makes sense. So the nice thing about this is it might seem like this is weird and kind of convoluted, but think of it kind of like this. So we have a create user panel right here. And then we have our login system effectively, right? And then we have some other upper entity, kind of like a UI manager or something like that, right? So what's going to happen is when somebody clicks create user panel, it's going to emit a signal. And then the login system is going to say, hey, we're creating a user. If somebody's logging in, then we're just going to say, hey, we're just logging in, right? And that's basically the flow of how the signals are going to work. And then you have your user manager or your UI manager or whatever you have that's up here. And that's going to inform your client here to go and tell your server that you're logging in or you're creating a user. And that's basically the gist of it. So it's really quite simple on how it gets approached, if that makes sense. So that's pretty much the reason why we're going that route. And now at this point, we can basically come in here and hook it up to our scene above us. Now you'll see we have our login panel here. So in our login panel, if we click this little build icon, we can build our .NET project. And that's going to allow us to hook up our create user panel here. So we'll just scroll to our create user panel. We'll drag that guy in here, and then we'll get rid of our create user panel. And that's basically going to just allow us to have a creatable and destroyable user panel that we want to use. Of course, if you don't have a use for that, you can always just not do that. That's up to you. Now, if you head back to our test scene, we can just drag our little login system right here. You can see that it's right here. Now, I'm going to drag this underneath our client. Technically speaking, it doesn't need to be this way. I'm just doing it this way because it's going to make it a little bit easier for me to be able to organize my code. So don't worry. It's up to you guys on how you guys want to approach this. Under LAN multiplayer tutorial, I believe we have a... It's been a while since I've looked at this, so forgive me. But I'm pretty sure we have a scene in here that we can use if we want to. But I'm not sure where it is right offhand. So in our case, I'm just going to stick with keeping it in the test scene just because it's going to make things a little bit easier. I'm going to drag that underneath my client because it's going to be easier to reference. But of course, you guys can reference it however you want, right? So if you didn't want it underneath the client node, you could put it under the control node, right? And that would work as well. But in my case, it's just going to be easier to reference it if it's underneath the client. So if I go into my client node here, you can see first, our server URL is set to 127.0.0.1. That's very important because we need our stuff to be able to connect. And you'll also notice that we're hooking up signals right here. So we basically need to do that right here. So we need to hook up our login panel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say get node login panel dot create user plus equals create user, like that. Now I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to do dot login user and I'm going to make that login user. So simple enough. And then I'll just select this guy, click on the little light bulb here. I'm going to generate that method. I'm going to do the same thing for login user as well. You can see now we have our create and login user. It's really that simple. And now from here, we can basically send our data out to our server so we can log in and or create a user. Now, in order to do that, we need to actually build out our different objects. So since C# is an object-based system, we can't just say, hey, we're going to, create a JSON object and throw it in like we do with GDScript. We actually need to go in and build an object specific for this. You can see it right here where it says server data, client ID, right, data right here. More or less, we have to do the same thing. So if you open up server data, you can see we have client ID data. Let's right click, new file, and type login data.cs like that. And then I'm basically just going to grab my client ID data. I'm going to copy this class and I'm going to go ahead and paste it into login data. And I'm just going to rename it login data like that. Now, basically, we need to figure out what data we want to send through the wire. Now, we could do a bunch of different types of data, and it's really up to us on what all we want to send. But in my case, I'm going to go ahead and say public int ID. And then I'm going to pass in public int org ID for original ID or original peer ID. Then we're going to need to pass in our message. But since we are inheriting from server data, if I open up server data, you'll see it has that message type. So we're good there. We don't need to actually add that. And then we need to add in our username. So public string username. And we should probably do the same thing for org ID. I don't know if we necessarily need org ID, but I'm going to grab it just in case. Then we're going to do public string password. And then we'll be doing, I think that's it. Really, I don't think we're going to need org ID, but might be good to keep it just in case. Now, since this is login data, we actually don't need to build a create user data one unless we want to add specific stuff to create a user. So like for instance, If you wanted to pass back like an email or something like that, you could either put that in here or you could put it in with your create user data, right? And create a separate object. In my case, I'm just going to create this one object and we'll just call it a day. So we'll go into our client, we'll come in here and we'll say login user. So first things first, we will create our object. So login data is equal to a new login data. Like that. We'll do bracket, and then we'll say username is equal to user, comma, password is equal to password, comma, ID is equal to, I believe we have an ID right here, peer.get unique ID. And I think that's really all we need to populate other than our message type. So we'll say, if we look at our server data object type, so type is equal to message type dot, and then we have to do a message type. Well, since we don't technically have that message type, it doesn't exist yet, we need to build it, right? So let's go and find where our message type is. So I'm going to right click this, go to definition, and I'll hit comma, login, comma, create user, like that. Easy enough. And then we'll come in here and we'll go create user, and then we will send that data across. So here dot put packet JSON dot stringify our data object, like that. And then we'll need to pass it to a UTF-8 buffer, like that. And that will send our data across the wire. Now, it's a little unhappy, cannot convert argument login data to Godot variant. So let's double check how we did it down here. It's been a minute since I've done this. So it's going to be JSON convert serialized object. So we actually needed to do Newtonsoft JSON instead of Godot JSON. So that's totally fine. So I will grab that really quick and do Newtonsoft JSON serialized object. And then we also look like we're using ASCII buffer. I'll double check. Yes. So everything is using ASCII buffer instead of UTF-8. So before in other tutorials, I've used UTF-8. ASCII is not a bad choice, but UTF-8 is a little bit more flexible. But in my case, I guess I'll just use ASCII since that's what we've been using. No sense in changing it up if we don't have to. Now, this is mad because it says cannot convert method group unique ID to non-delegate int. Did you intend to invoke a method? This is actually returning an int. It is a function, not a delegate. So we need all that. Here we go. Put a semicolon right there, and that's pretty much our login user. And the beauty of this, actually, we need to change message type to login like that. And if we want to just log in, or if we want to just create our user, we just copy this, paste it, and do create user. That's all we have to do, and it's all done for us. So that's kind of the good thing about object-oriented coding is that it's very simple. It's very easy to work with. So that's really all we need to do. So we'll head over to our server side, and we'll come down to where our processing of our packets are. So I'm going to Control-Shift-P, fold all. That'll fold everything. It's going to give us a little bit more space here. I'm going to open this guy up, then open this guy up, and we can basically take a look at all of this. So you can see here, we have a if data type is a message candidate, then do these things. Well, if data.type is equal to message type dot login, then let's do some stuff. And then same thing, if data.type is equal to message type dot create user, then we will do some stuff here. So if you guys remember, if we take a look up here, we need to JSON convert that information. So let's just kind of grab this guy right here, paste it, and then tab, paste, and do login data, copy, paste, and then we will do login data, and then create user data. And then we'll change the type to be login data, just like that. Now, that's just going to deserialize that object, but what we'll do is we'll just print our information. So gd.print, we'll pass in data. And now if I copy this and I paste it right here, just like that. That should work. Now that's just going to give us kind of that round trip so we can actually see if all of our code up to the server is actually working properly, because we just built a bunch of code. We just have no idea if it's going to work. So it's just a good idea to mess with it and make sure that it operates before we go into it. So let's go ahead and save our scene here. Let's double check to make sure that all of our stuff is saved. It is. Go to project, debug, run multiple instances, run 2 instances, and then let's hit play. Now, first we'll host. You'll see that our server has started. We will join. You see that we have created a connection, and then we're going to go ahead and create a user. So click on create user, commit password, and we will click submit. And we have a crash. So that's not a good sign, but let's see what's up. So we have a debug error, object, invalid cast exception, cannot cast object, Godot line edit to Godot rich text label. So that's totally fine. That means that in our create user panel, we are casting it as a rich text label. It is a line edit, not a rich text label. That's our fault. So we'll go ahead and paste guys in. Let's take a look at our login panel as well to just verify, yep, we did that over here as well. So it's going to cause a problem. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And let's try this one more time. So we'll hit host, we'll hit join. We will click on create user, commit, test, or I guess password, submit. Now you'll see that it worked. Look, we can see that our server data username is Mitch, password is password, type is 9, and that worked pretty well. Now let's go ahead and try to log in. So Mitch and password and click login, and you will see that it worked. It did exactly what we wanted. So good. Everything up to this point actually worked, which is amazing because it never works the first time. So this is truly awesome. So now we need to be able to store our user information, and we need to be able to actually log in. So now we have to talk about how we can actually do our server side. So how can we store our user data? Thankfully, that's going to be relatively easy. So if we go into our server.cs here, you can see that we have this section here where we're actually printing out our data. So in order for us to store our data, all we need to do is basically create what's called a DAO, or a data access object. So what we'll do is we'll just come in here and create a folder. We'll call it DAO. And then inside of that, I'm going to right click, create a new file, and I'm going to call it user DAO.cs. Now, some people like to do it this way. Some people don't. Completely up to you on how you want to handle it. In my case, I always like to put my data access object kind of all in the same area. And I like to segment out my data access objects by the actual object themselves. So for instance, if you're doing something like logging in, I would have a user DAO or a login DAO or some kind of user management DAO, which would have that information built into it. So in our case, that's how I plan on doing it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically copy this little bit of code here just to get a public class user DAO. And it's going to go ahead and inherit from nothing. Now, inside of this class, it's going to be relatively simple to do. So now for us to be able to do this, we need to basically add in the ability to use SQLite. So for us to use SQLite, we need to add in the Microsoft SQLite package. So let's come in here, click on our 3 dots, go to terminal, new terminal, and let's type .NET add package Microsoft .data.sqlite, like that. And it's going to go ahead and restore and add that into our project here. So now I can come in here and basically code out our database creation script. So we can come in here and just say string db path is equal to project, not projection, project settings dot globalized path. And I'm going to pass in a user : / and plus quote data.db. Now what this is going to do is it's basically going to grab our project settings. It's going to pull back the globalized path of our user directory. And now that's going to pass us out to wherever our user path is on our device. So if we're on Windows, it'd be something like appdata/Godot/ your project name /data.db. So that's basically what this is doing here. So now we have to create our function to create our database. Now I'm going to go through and build all of our functions in here before we even leave here, just because I want to make sure that we have everything kind of done before we jump out of this script. So first things first, public void create database, like that. And what we'll do is we'll go string connection string is equal to quote data space source is equal to / quote space plus db path plus quote / quote. And that's just going to give us a nice connection string for us to work from. Now we're going to type using SQLite connection con is equal to a new SQLite connection. And we'll bring in that connection string. So what this is doing is it's doing what's called a using statement. And actually it's con string, not connection string. There we go. And basically inside this using statement, everything inside of here is going to get destroyed as soon as this using is completed. It's just basically good practice. I know technically speaking, you could just leave this function and it should get called, but it's just good practice to go this route and do it this way. So we're going to type con.open, and then we're going to run our create table SQL. So we'll type string SQL is equal to @ quote, and then we'll type create table if not exists users, and we'll do capital users like that. And then from here, we can define which columns we want. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying create table. So that's creating our table. If not exist. So we're saying if that table does not exist, build this table. And then we're going to come in here and just define what those are. So first things first is our ID, and we'll make that an integer. We're going to make that a primary key, and we'll make that auto increment. Then we need to have a column for our name. So we'll type name, text, not null. And that's basically going to ensure that we have some form of value. And then password. We'll make that text, and we'll make that not null as well. And then we'll pass in a salt, and we'll make that a text, not null. And then we'll do the same thing, but for something else, like a score. Now, the reason why I'm adding in a score is not that the score really matters, but it's going to give us a way to return some data. So that way we have some way of showing, hey, this is how you return data from a database to somebody else, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the purpose of that little bit right there. Now you can see we have not null here. Not null basically means that you have to put a value in. You cannot put data in this database if it isn't in this parameter, right? So you can't just add a row to the users table without having a name, a password, and a salt, basically. Now we just need to execute that command. So we'll type using SQLite command cmd is equal to a new SQLite command, and we'll type SQL, conn for our connection. And then we'll say cmd.execute non-query, and that's going to go ahead and execute that query. Now, once we have our database created, we need to actually create a user, right? So that's going to be relatively simple. All we have to do is say public void create user, like that. And then we'll type string username, string password, string salt, like that. And then we can basically duplicate this entire script, pretty much. But instead of using this bit of SQL here, we can basically change it to do what we need it to do, which in our case is inserting data into that users table. So we'll say insert into users name, password, salt, values at name, at password, at salt. Now I know this is not going to make sense to you but just trust me, it will in a moment as soon as I finish this little bit here. Once we get down here into where our connection is and where our command is, what we're going to do is type cmd dot parameters dot add with value. Okay. And we're going to come in here and say at name, comma, username, like that. Now you'll notice that if I duplicate this 3 times and I grab at password, at salt, string password, and string salt right here, what this is doing is it's allowing us to basically come in here and say, I'm going to add these guys into here instead of doing like plus, plus username plus password plus salt like we do with other string values, kind of like this guy up here. Well, basically, when we do it like this protects against SQL injection. And SQL injection is huge. You don't want people to be able to pass in data and pull back data that they're not supposed to, or God forbid, wipe your entire database because you didn't protect against SQL injection. Because you can basically inject SQL and say, I want you to basically insert this data, but also drop this table. And a lot of times people make those mistakes and it completely can destroy a project. So that's the reason why we do it this way, is it helps protect against that. Now, if we come down here, we need to actually be able to log in. So I'm going to do public. And for our return type, since we're getting back our user data, let's go ahead and just pass back login data, because that's very close to what we actually want. So you can see we have ID, org ID, username, password. Really, all we need to do is add in public string salt and public int score, like that. And we really have everything that we want to pass back. Really, this should probably be renamed from login data to user data. And that might be better than login data, but we can burn that bridge when we get there. So we'll say public login data, and we'll just say get user info, like that. And we'll pass in a string username, like that. And what we'll do when we want to get back our user data is we're basically just going to steal this, right? Copy it, paste, and we can keep all this pretty much the same except for right here. We're going to need to change this. So instead of doing insert into, we're going to do select salt, comma, password, comma, ID from users where name is equal to at name, right? And I think actually we don't need these parentheses. I'll go ahead and get rid of those. I don't think we really need those, but this is going to select our salt, password, and ID from our users wherever our username is equal to our name. And then we can come down here, and instead of doing these 2 parameter queries, we could just do this one. And then instead of doing a non-query, which a non-query returns no data, we want to return data. So since we want to return data, we need to add in a bunch of stuff here. So we'll say using var reader is equal to cmd.execute reader, like that. And then we could basically go ahead and read our data. So we'll say while reader.read, then go ahead and do stuff, right? So what do we want to do here? Well, really, we know that we're only going to get back one result, right, with that username. So what we can do is just say return new login data, like that. And then we can come in here and say username is equal to username, comma, salt is equal to reader.getString, parentheses 0, comma, copy that 2 times. And then we could just basically do password and reader.getString1. And then I believe the last one was score or ID. I think it was ID actually. Yeah, ID right here. So get string 3, and instead of string, we'll do get int 32 3. And then if all this happens and it doesn't come back with any data, then we can return null, like that. And that's it. And now at this point, we can go back to our server and hook all of this up. So let's go back to our server and let's scroll up to the top, and then let's go ahead and actually create our database. So we'll say user DAO. DAO is equal to a new user DAO. And then we'll say DAO.create database like that. And that's going to go ahead and create that database. Now, if we come down here, we can go and add in our login and create user. So if we come into our create user, since that's probably going to be the first one we test anyway, let's just do the exact same thing we just did. So user DAO is equal to user DAO. DAO.create user, and then we need to pass in our user's information. Now you can see here we have our data right here. We need to pass this data as a type of an object, right? So we can come in here and say user DAO or user, I think it was login data. So login data, user data is equal to JSON convert dot deserialize object bracket login data bracket data string like that. And then we could basically just pass that data in user data dot name comma user data dot password like that. And I believe it requires a salt. So we'll just say quote 2 just for a value, just something. So what happens if we actually test this? Well, if we come into Godot here and we hit play, well, first we failed to build. So we have a semicolon expected. So we'll drop that bad boy in there. Come on back and let's try it again. And then we will click host, we will click join, and then we will click create user, Mitch, and password, and we'll click submit. And you'll notice that nothing really changed here. But if we go out to project, open user data folder, you'll notice that we have a data.db and it looks like it has some data in it. So that's good, right? That's a good sign. So how do we actually check what kind of data this has in it? Well, if we come into our Windows here and we type db browser for SQLite, this is a tool that allows you to inspect databases. If we click on open database, click on this guy, copy it, and then paste, you'll see that we have our data.db. If I come into here, we go to browse data, click on browse data, you can see Mitch, password, and 2. So it worked. Awesome, right? That's great. That's great news, right? So how can we actually log in? Well, that's actually really easy. We can basically do this exact same thing, but more or less just check our password, right? So if we head back to C# here, we can come into our server and basically just copy this little bit of information here, copy, paste, hit enter, and type DAO.get user info. And then we can pass in our username. So user data dot name like that. And that's going to pass back a login data. So we can come back here and type login data. Database user data is equal to DAO user info. Now, what we can do here is we can just check if our user data dot password is equal to our database user data password like that. And if it's true, then we can just go gd.print successfully logged in. Else, we can basically just pass back failed. Failed to log in. So now if we come back to Godot here and we refresh it, and we come in here and type Mitch, and we go password, and we type login, well, first we have an error. So that's good and bad. That's because I forgot to connect. So that's my fault. So we'll refresh that bad boy. We'll click host. We'll click join. We'll type Mitch. We'll type password, and we'll click login. Now you'll see it did connect. We did send the thing. we got an error. SQLite argument out of range exception was thrown. Parameter ordinal actual value was 3. So what in the world does that mean? Well, if we take a look at our user DAO, it's mad because we are getting back data that is incorrect. You can see 0, 1, and 3. This should be 2, not 3. That's my fault. There's only 3 objects here, 0, 1, and 2. So let's try that again. So that's my fault. So let's come in here, host, join, Mitch, and password. Log in, successfully logged in. What happens if we try to log in with a password that is incorrect? Failed to log in. And that's basically the simplest way to make a login system. Now, obviously, this is not a great login system, right? Because, well, A, we're passing our passwords in plain text, which is unacceptable by even the basic standards of security, but also because really we're not passing back any data. So let's first pass back some data. So let's go to our client, add in a child node, and let's add in a panel like so. And let's make it about this big, give or take. We'll just kind of throw it over here in the corner. And what we'll do with this panel is we're going to right click, add in a line rich text label. And then let's come in here and type name, or I guess username, like that. We'll grab that guy. We will go ahead and duplicate it, drag it down, duplicate it one more time, drag it down. And I guess really you'd only have like 2 bits of information here. You really just have the username and their score, right? I don't think that there's any other information that we house in here that's, I guess, their ID. So we could do that. So we'll do ID up here, ID, username, and score, because you don't want to pass back their password. We'll do that. And then we'll grab these guys, duplicate them, and then pull them over like that. Now we'll put ID text. I guess ID is fine, name is fine, and score is fine. And then we'll just call this info panel like that. And that's just going to house that little bit of info. Now I do want to pull these guys down just a tiny bit. And we'll get rid of information on these guys so that way they're just empty like that. Now I'm going to go into my client. And I'm basically just going to and actually I think I'll go to my server first and pass back my data first. So when we want to pass back data, we want to create a new login data object. So we'll say login data, return data, and we'll make that equal to a new login data. And then we'll go ahead and sanitize out some of our data. So we'll say username is equal to database user data dot name like that. And then we'll do score is equal to database user data dot score. And then we'll pass back our ID, which is equal to our database user ID or data.id like that. And then we'll basically send that data out. Now, the easiest way to send that data out, if you remember, is to basically call out your peer and then send the data. So you can do that by, if we take a look at our send to peer, you can see send to peer int server data. So we can just type send to peer. And for the ID, we could probably just pass in our user data.id, org ID, comma, and then for the data, we could just pass in our return data. Now we may want to kind of drag in that org ID. So maybe org ID is equal to user data.org ID, just so that way we have that information saved somewhere. And then we can just send that data back to the peer. And then we can basically do that. We might want to add in a message type as well, so that way we know what we are going to be sending back. So if we take a look at login data, go to definition, then go to definition, you can see it's just type. So we'll go ahead and pass that in. So capital type is equal to message type dot, and we can go ahead and come up with a message type. We probably should do a user data type. As you can see here, none of this is in here. So I'm going to go ahead and add that type in. So I'll just go into here. We'll just do message type ID. We'll go to definition, comma, user data, like that. And then we'll go back to our server and type user data, like that. Easy enough. And now at this point, we could send this back to our peer right here. And that means on our client side, we can come in here and go up here like this and do on process, which is right here. We can come in here and say if data.type is equal to user data, like that, then we can go ahead and use that data, which means we could do something like this. We can JSON deserialize that data. So we'll just copy this page here, copy this, and say user data, or it's not user data, it's login data. So we'll say login data, like that, and then we'll copy this, drag it over here, and then we'll say get node rich text label, and we need to path to that object. So it's going to be info panel with 2 N's, because for some reason I always spell panel with 2 N's. I don't know why that is. We'll say info panel slash ID dot text is equal to our offer data, which should be called login data. I should probably change that. So let's change that to login data. That's just going to make things a little bit cleaner. Dot ID, like that. And we'll need to pass this as a string. So dot to string, like that. And then we'll just copy, paste, and paste. And then we'll do name and score. And we could just pass in name and score. So now, in theory, if we come in here, we hit play. Well, failed to build because we're missing a semicolon. Those semicolons always get me, so we'll just add that in. We'll come in here, hit play. And then you'll see that we'll host, we'll join, we'll say Mitch, and we'll say password. We'll click login, and we have a failure. So we have an issue right here. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. Here int ID. My guess is that I might just need to pass back ID like that, and then ID like that. And let's see if that works better, because original ID might not actually have data in it. So that's probably why it's doing that. So we'll say host, join, Mitch, password, login. And you'll see right here, ID 1, Mitch, and score is 0. So now we're getting data back, which is great. So our login system's actually working, and it's actually working properly, which is awesome. So now the question is, okay, well, we're passing our stuff as plain text. Is that acceptable or is it not? And the answer to that is absolutely not. It is absolutely not acceptable. You cannot pass something like this and have plain text passwords in your database. It's just an unacceptable thing. You can't do that. So how can we actually obscure and secure our password? Well, that's where salting and hashing comes in. So hashing is when you obscure your password, right? And salting is how you secure your password and make it unique. Now, we're going to need to salt and hash our password. So what we need to do is we need to basically build a system to handle that. So let's go ahead and build out a salt and hashing system. So let's go to our code here. So let's go here. Let me resize this. There we go. What we'll do is we'll make a utility class for this. So I'm just going to come in here and we'll right click server data at this point. We'll create a new file and we'll call it crypto utils, and I need to add .cs at the end. There we go. And we'll say class crypto utils. And basically what we're going to do is build a very basic cryptography utility class here. And we'll go ahead and make this public class crypto utils. Now we need to actually be able to generate our salt. So I'm going to say public void packed byte array generate salt. And then I'm going to pass in a int length. I'm going to make that equal to 32. That way it's just defaulted to 32. So you'll see it's going to be mad at us because packed byte array doesn't exist. So what we can do is come in here, click on this, and it looks like we can't do packed byte array, but I'll leave that alone for right now because it might be that my return type is wrong here. So we'll do var crypto is equal to crypto.new new crypto like that. And then we'll say return crypto dot generate random bytes length dot hex encode. And this is going to return a byte array. It looks like right here. You can see actually it returns a hexadecimal as a string. So this actually returns a string. There we go. And we'll do that. And then for us to be able to generate out a hash or to hash a password, what we can do is just come in here and say public string hash password like that. We could pass in our string password and then our string salt. Now, this is how we kind of encode our password so it's more secure. And I'll explain all of this a lot more in depth in a minute. But right now, we'll just go through, build it out, and then we'll talk about it. So we'll say var password data is equal to password.toUTF-8 buffer. Now it can be a UTF-32, UTF-16, it's up to you. UTF-8 is just a little bit more efficient. And then we'll do var salt data is equal to salt.toUTF-8 buffer like that. We just want to make sure they have the same buffer. And then we'll combine the data. So we'll just go string combined data is equal to password data plus salt data like that. And then we could basically combine these two, right? So it looks like adding them is not going to work. So what we'll do is we'll say var, or I guess if you want to do it with byte array, you could also do that. Combined data is equal to password data dot, and we can use what's called a link. So we can say concat our other array, so we can pass in our salt data dot to array. And that will combine and concat that data. And then I can basically get rid of this. And it's going to get a little mad. Cannot be accessed with an instance reference. Qualify it with a domain name. With a name instead. This is a byte array. Let me double check. Oh, I missed data. That's why. There we go. Concat that data. And that way we can basically concat the data and get it ready for our encryption. And then we need to hash that data. And to hash data, we could basically say hashing context is equal to a new hashing context. And then we can basically say hashing context dot start. We need to pass in a type, so we'll do SHA-256. 256 is the most secure version of hashing currently available. So we'll use that. And then we'll say hashing context.update, and we'll pass in our combined data. And then we can return our hash data by doing hashing context.finish hex encode. And now this is going to return a type string. So we're perfect. This is exactly what we want. So what is this data doing? Well, basically we're passing in a string, we're passing in a salt value or another string, and then we're basically taking the two values, combining them, and then running an algorithm on it to generate out a string based off of those two byte arrays, if that makes sense. And the beauty of this, and I'll show you in a little bit, but basically the nice thing about this is that it allows us to maintain a consistent value if the inputs are the same, but it allows us to vary our value if they're different. So you could pass in a string called password and a salt called password, and the value that would come out of this would be completely different than if you passed in password and Jonathan, right? And it would be a completely different value. So that's the beauty of this system. And now we also need to be able to hash our client side password. And the reason why is because if I type in the word password and I send password to our server side, if somebody intercepts that data, then they're going to know that the person's password is password. And I know that that might sound useless in your opinion, right? Well, who cares if they know that because they don't have the salt, right? Well, yes, but a lot of times users reuse their passwords. So you want to salt that password so it's an indecipherable string of data so that the server doesn't know what the password is, plain text password is, and that way it makes everything a little bit more secure for the users. So we'll come in here and say public string hash password, and we'll just pass in string password like that. And this is called an overloaded function. So we'll have two hash passwords, but one will take a salt and one will not take a salt. And that just gives us a little bit more consistency and allows us to have a little easier to understand code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a hashing context. I'm going to pass in this guy right here. And this is the big difference. This is why this could not get abstracted to a separate function, is because when we come down here, we need to encode that data as UTF-8. So since we have to change it to a UTF-8 buffer, we're going to need to make it into its own function. So we'll say hashing context dot update, and we'll pass in password dot to UTF-8 buffer like that. And then we will say return hashing context dot finished dot to you hex encode like that. And there we go. And that's our entire cryptology pretty much completed. So now let's actually implement that into our server and into our client. Over here in our client, we can basically come into here and call out our crypto utils. Now, with this being a utility function, we actually could do public static string and then public static string and then public static string. And that's going to make all this static. And the nice thing about that is that if we come into here, we basically can access our stuff directly. So we can type crypto utils dot hash password, and then we can just pass in our password just like that. And you'll notice that if I come in here, I can do comma, and you can see it says string password, string salt, or just password. So I actually have access to both of them here. So I'll just do hash password password. I'll grab this guy like so, copy it, and bring it down here and do the same thing. Now, of course, this is going to break all of our previous login stuff, so just keep that in mind. Now, if we head over to our server side, we can basically do the same thing, but slightly different. So when a user logs in, all we really want to do is pull their data info, right? And then pull back their salt. And actually, before we even do that, let's just take a quick step back. Let's go down to create user and actually just do this portion here. So when we want to hash out our password, we have hash password and generate salt, right? So we can come in here and we can basically just say, okay, let's create a user and build out a salt and hash, right? Hash for it. So we can come in here and type, and that's client, go to server. In server under create user, we can just come down here and say string salt is equal to crypto utils dot generate salt. And I don't have to pass in any value here, but it allows us to overload it if we need to, which in this case, I don't think we do. And then we can do string pass is equal to crypto utils dot hash password. And I can pass in my user data dot password, comma, and then I can pass in my salt like that. And that's going to bring back that password. And then I can change this to pass and then this to salt, like that. And that'll actually handle a lot of that for us. And now at this point, we can come in to Godot here, hit play, come over here, host it, join, create a user, call it Mitch number, I think we're on 3, and then do password, and click submit. Now, nothing really happened down here. That's totally fine. But if we take a look at this and we refresh it, well, it doesn't seem to have done anything at all. So I'm curious if something broke somewhere. I had a little bit of an issue earlier when I was messing around with this. Let's try refreshing this. All right, well, let me debug this really quick. So let's go into our client real quick. Go down here, make sure that our create user, is this code even running? Let me see. No, so somehow this data got disconnected. If we take a look at our login panel, on button down, we do this, we emit a signal, it comes through here, it goes through our create user panel, it emits a signal, and then it goes to our client. Our client is grabbing create user. So that should work, and then it should be firing this off. It should be putting the packet. But I should be seeing on the server side a print of that data, and I'm not. So that's what I'm confused about. Or maybe it just took a second to get there because now I have a SQLite exception. Database is locked. So that's my fault. So basically, you can see here I have write changes. So I'll click on that and that should unlock this database. Sometimes if you change data inside of the database, you can lock that database and cause problems. Let's try this now. So we'll click create join, Mitch 3, and we'll do password, and we will click submit. And you'll see that now it shows up right here. Now, if we take a look at this data here, we refresh it, you can see we have a password and a salt. Now, the beauty of this is if I create another user, so if I come into Godot here, let's find the one that I'm looking for, not that one, this one, and I do Mitch 4 and I click submit, it's going to create another user. So if I refresh, you'll see Mitch 4. But you'll notice it is the exact same password. It's password, but the password is completely different. Whereas before, it was completely the same. And actually, I think I might have reset part of my tutorial. So I don't know if I actually went over this part. But basically, I ran through the hash and I just basically added the user. So it's all the same code, but this is just showing that the password was the same. And then once we salted it, now the password is completely different, if that makes sense. So now we have to do the same thing, but backwards, right? So when somebody wants to log in, we need to hash their data and pull their salt. So if we head over to our code here, we can go into our server here. And when we do our login right here, we can actually grab our section here and check for this. So we can come in here and just say, if user data.password equals database user data.password, right? Well, what we can do is come in here and type crypto utils dot hash password. We can pass in that password, comma, we can pass in our database user data.salt like that. And what that's going to do is it's going to hash it with the same algorithm as what we used before, thereby increasing our security and making things way more security focused, if that makes sense. So now we can come back here into Godot, refresh, and I should be able to log in with Mitch 3. So we'll host, we'll join, we'll type Mitch 3, and we'll type password, and we'll click login. And you'll see that we just logged in as Mitch 3. We have ID 7, username is Mitch 3, score is 0. Now, what happens if we want to log in as Mitch 1, right? Well, let's just change this to Mitch 1. And I added in password. So it's the password, right? Log in. You'll notice that nothing happens. if you take a look at this, failed to log in with 2 exclamation points. And that's because when it selected the data and it hashed it, it compared it against the expected value and it wasn't the same. So even though the password is technically correct, because the salt is different, it didn't work. And that's just because we didn't create Mitch 1 with salting in mind. If we did Mitch 4, for instance, and we log in, you'll see that we are able to log in and everything works perfectly fine. So it's just because we didn't hash this guy correctly. We didn't add the proper salt in, but I wouldn't worry about that just because it's not that big of a deal right now. It's just something that, I wanted to show so that way you guys can see why it's important, why it's useful to have this. Now, one last thing that we should probably add is if they log in and they fail to log in because of a password, we should probably tell them that they failed to log in. And I'm going to add that in really quick just because it's a 5-second fix. If we go into our login panel, we can come down here, right click, add in a child node, and let's add in a label. And let's make this error text. And let's go ahead and drag this guy down here. It's a little bit on the tight side, but I think it's going to be okay. And we can come down here and go to theme overrides, colors, font color, and let's make it red because red is the universal, this is not a good thing value. So we'll kind of drag this guy into a nice deep red and pull it about there. And let's see if we could change the font size. So we can change this from 1 pixel to something like 10 maybe, or maybe something like 12. There we go. And we could just kind of pull this guy down and that should work. So we could probably do error password or username is invalid. There we go. That should be enough space and we can kind of drag this up just a little bit. There we go. And I think that will work. So I'm going to cut that so it doesn't exist. I'm going to go into my login panel and I'm going to come down here and say public void set error text, and I'm going to pass in a string. And what I'll do is I'll basically just say get node label, and I will come in here and we'll just grab label, it looks like. So I'll probably change this to error label. That way it's a little bit easier for us to figure out who is what. So error label dot text is equal to text, like that. And that's just going to allow us to handle their error label. Now, what I also would suggest is when they click the login button down, let's go ahead and just set this to nothing. That way it doesn't exist or it's kind of hidden from view. And that way, if you log in and the login's successful, it doesn't show an error text. Or if you want to change that error text, right, it's probably just a good idea. Now, once we have this, we can basically come in here, Control S, our login panel, go to our client code. So we can come in here into our client code and let me resize this to match. And then when we come down here, we can create a data type for this. So if we go ahead and close all of this, click on this guy, go to message type. So I believe that's under server data, probably. It doesn't look like it. Message type.cs. And then we can come in here and go comma, login error text. And then we can come into our code here, right click, new file, login error.cs. We can just copy this, go to login error, paste, do that, and then login error like that. And then all we'll do is we'll just say public string error text like that. And then we can go into our server here. And if they fail, instead of doing what we were doing before, we could just copy this, paste it, and go login error, copy, paste, and burn all of this, but then do error text is equal to quote, and then we can put whatever errors we want. If we want to pass in a special error, we can, or if we want something like that, we can do whatever we'd like. So what I'm going to do is type error, invalid user or password. Pretty simple, short, easy to understand, and that should work. And then that will allow us to pass that data and return it. And then on our client side, we can basically refer to that. So if data.type is equal to message type dot login error text, then we can go ahead and basically notify our login system of it. So we can basically come in to our, I believe it's just login panel. So get node as login panel, quote, login panel dot, and then we can pull back our login panel. So that's going to pull it back and allow us to access that stuff. So we'll come in and say set error text, and then we'll pass in the data that we're going to parse out. So we can come down here and say login error. I believe it's just login error.cs. Login error is equal to, and I'm just going to pull this bit of code here so I can just steal that, copy, paste, and then we'll say set error text as login error dot error text. And that should basically handle that. So now we can just refresh this bad boy, and I can try logging in as, in this case, Mitch4. So we'll say Mitch4. Password is going to be test password instead. Log in, and nothing happened. Well, let's see what's going on. So we have an error. So if we take a look, error, native call condition, error unconfigured. That's because I forgot to connect to my server. I always make that mistake. So we'll hit host, we'll click join, we'll type Mitch4, we'll do password, error password, and log in. And you'll see that nothing happened. We did get back a 0. We got error text invalid. So that's right, but it's a type 10. Debugger error 1. Object not set instance to an object. So it's telling us that the type of data that's coming back is user data, because you can see here, it's pulling that back. So the question is, because it's number 10, so for some reason it's pulling back user data, which is 10. So if we take a look at our server, oh, that's because this is message type.user data. So we'll say message type.login error text, and then let's try that one more time. So we'll click refresh, and it should just work. So we'll click host, join, Mitch4, and login error. Log in, and you'll see error, invalid username or password. But now if I type password and I click login, you'll see that that gets rid of that text data, and we're good to go. So that's basically how to create a very basic login system inside of Godot. Now you'll notice that the score here is 0. That's because this is null. So if we were to set this value with an insert or an update, let's say we were to do 15 and I save it, I can log in as Mitch4, and it didn't return the data. So my guess is if I take a look at my server scripts, let's see, take a look at our server script here. I don't think I'm passing that data back. User database score. So that's correct. Let me take a look at my DAO real quick. Yeah, and you can see here, we're not actually setting it right here because we're not actually pulling it back. So we need to pull that back. So score, and then we can come in here and do score get 3 like that. And then if we refresh this should just work now. So if we hit host and then we hit join, we can go Mitch number 4. And then we can go password, log in, and you'll see that we pull back that score value that I put in the database right here. So what happens if we do Mitch 3 and we log in? Well, we got an error right here. So what happened? Well, the data is null on ordinal 3. This method cannot be called on null values. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, something that you could do is you could make this a non-nullable row and then make it default to 0, which is probably the easiest method. But what are other options that we can do? And that is where null checking comes in. And I'm going to come in here. I'm going to grab this guy and I'm going to say, is DB null 3 question mark 0 colon reader dot get int 32, and then I'll pass in a 3. So the question is, what is this doing? Well, basically, because I'm not enforcing null checking on this area, and we don't want to return a null if there is a null, what this is going to do is say, is this value null? If so, make it 0. If not, then make it the value that it actually is. And that's going to help with making our code a bit more type safe, safer to use. So now we can refresh this, host, join, Mitch, I believe it was 3 if I remember correctly, password, log in, and you'll see that it comes back with 0 instead of breaking our project. And that's a good way of solving those kinds of problems with your project. Now, the absolute last thing that we should check is if we have spaces at the end of these or at the beginning, because sometimes people hit space, and if you do that, it may break your project. In this case, I don't think it's going to. You can see it's logging in just fine. So that's good news. So if I change this to like 4 and I log in, no, it is failing. There we go. You can see the error right here, debug 6. So we have 6 issues. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. Now, the reason why that is happening is because it's attempting to hash a value that it just can't because it has spaces in it. So what we need to do is we need to come in and basically strip all of that out on the client side. So let's go in to our client over here. Let's scroll down. And when we do a login, which actually is going to be under the login side, so we can come into, I believe it's just the login panel right here. We can come in here, take this text right here, and strip it out. So we can basically just go .trim like that. And then do the same thing for the password, .trim. And then we'll want to do the same thing for create user. So let's go to create user panel and do .trim and .trim. And that'll clean all of that up. So now, in theory, as long as we have that, we should be able to do Mitch 4 password space, log in, and it's mad. Why is it mad? Let's see. Oh, error unconfigured. Of course, I forgot to log in as always. So let's host, join, Mitch 4, password space, log in, and you'll see that it lets us log in. If we create a user, Mitch 5 with a bunch of spaces, and then password, and we hit submit, you'll see in the database side, when we refresh this, Mitch 5 does not have any spaces on it. Those trailing spaces all got removed. So that's the big advantage to doing that, is it just makes your code a little bit less error prone and a little bit more robust. So at this point, you have a pretty good understanding of how to make a very basic login system for your game. So we talked about how to create an actual login panel. We talked about how to get your communication working with your server. We talked about adding in the new segments for that. We added in SQLite support for our little project here. And we actually talked about how to properly secure your password by hashing and salting that password. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, you know, if you dislike this video, go ahead and hit that dislike button because I'm here to make content for you guys. This video was a viewer suggested video. So if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to take a look at them and possibly add them to my list. Or you can jump on my GitHub, link is in the description, and just put in an issue there and I'll be more than happy to add it to my list as well. That's usually how I keep track of most of these things. And hey, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below or jump on my Discord. Link is in the description and anyone there will be more than happy to help you out. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching and I will see you all next time. Thanks.